Hello, this is James Cook of the University of Maine at Augusta, and I'd like to talk to you today about how to craft effective academic presentations. We've all seen presentations in higher education and at research conferences that have been very effective and arresting, and we've seen some presentations that just are like hitting a wall and never seem to be understood by their audiences. What are some differences between the two? In order to answer that, we really have to think about what is an academic presentation made up of. And I'd like to suggest that there are three elements. The first is the content. And it's certainly the case that some academic presentations do well because they have important content, and some do poorly because the content really doesn't make sense. But within any level of quality, you can have your presentation go over better by thinking not just about the content of the material that you have to communicate, but by thinking about how you say it, by thinking about individual psychology of folks in the audience. You can help people to understand you better, as they want to do. They're really on your side and trying to help you. So you have to try to help them through organization of that content. But apart from the content, there are also matters of style that can help you or they can hurt you. And that is more visual. And we'll complete the discussion of presentations with a discussion of style. So if content is what you say, in order to really make a presentation well, you have to know what you're talking about. And that means that you need to, if you are describing an academic paper, whether it is yours or someone else's, you need to know what the elements of that paper are, and you need to follow those elements through. That includes within any paper, if there are any statistics, being able to describe what those statistics are. Or if you are describing statistics from an external source, being able to describe statistics as well. And then you also should know what the cultural understanding within academia is of the elements of any academic presentation, because it's what folks will expect. When you are able to present within the limits of what people expect, then whatever you have to say will go over better. You have to know these three kinds of content. So let's talk about academic papers. The elements of that academic paper are an abstract. It's a one-paragraph summary of what a research paper is all about. In that, you can look for an outcome. Now, what is the outcome of the study? You have to be able to make that clear in your presentation of content. What are they trying to explain? What is the research question? So thinking about the outcome that they want to explain is essential. You also are going to want to think about a literature review, which is describing the context of previous research on the same subject, but you can't hope to just provide everything in the literature review in a short talk of about 15 minutes. It just can't happen. Just as you can't read the abstract out, although some people do try, it's going to tend to take up a lot of time. Instead, just as in the abstract, you look for the outcome and you describe the outcome very quickly, turning that one paragraph into one sentence. In a literature review, you should be looking for two elements: different theories, which are stories about how a piece of the world works, right, related to that outcome. And theories should generate hypotheses, that is, predictions about what we should find in the world that we observe as a consequence. So don't identify every element of the entire literature review, which could be pages of text. Certainly don't read the paper, but instead find those theories, find patterns of theories, and describe what the different hypotheses are that are generated from the theories, what the predictions are about what we should see. Data and methods The what data is collected and how it is collected are important, but they often can be very quickly summarized and left to further discussion should someone have questions. Particularly the methods, which is describing the type of analysis that was carried out. In a written paper, this can take up a few pages, because it's really important that people be able, when they're reading a research paper from front to back, be able to understand how to replicate it. In a presentation, you can be much more cursory describing the methods of analysis that are used. When it comes to data, the elements that you'll want to describe are how large the data set is, how many cases they are, what population it's meant to represent. So in social science, is this a geographic population? Is it a group, or is it a set of groups? What groups are they? Where are they located? In what time period? And in what place? You should leave it at that level and then quickly move to results. What is actually found? And compare that then to what was predicted by the different theories with their hypotheses, their predictions in the literature review section. Do results tend to support one set of theories with their accompanying hypotheses? Are they compatible with none of the theories or hypotheses? That's the kind of first thing that you can talk about in a conclusion. Um, so, in the second piece, which is going to include some kind of statistical report, either in the findings of an academic paper that you describe, or in reference to perhaps some government statistics, you're going to be describing variables. Variables are characteristics with values that vary, and how one variable changes when a second variable changes. That's a bivariate relationship. You might end up having a multivariate relationship to talk about, which is how two variables or more varying together lead to differences in the observed value of the outcome. Okay, so you'll want to be able to describe those as well. Look for differences. Usually it's in differences in mean outcomes, but it might be actually median outcome or some other measure. Be sure to look in the tables and understand what it is that you're seeing. Finally, do note as well in the statistical reports what the coverage is, especially if statistics are reported on their own. You need some indication of who the people are that are being studied, in what time period, and in what place. So, for instance, we have information here from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that does not actually have an explicit description of what the studied population is. Although if we go to bls.gov, we know that that is the Bureau of Labor Statistics of the United States government, and it is from the current population survey. So we can find out who is being studied here. It is American households, so we know that it is households looking at the upper left. We know what year we're talking about here. It is 2018. We know that these are annual averages as measured as median, right? Not as measured by a mean, but as a median. And that we're looking at numbers specifically when we're talking about number of workers that are in the thousands. So that when we see a total of 115,567, that represents actually 115,567,000. And 14 legislators actually ends up being 14,000 legislators. Okay. So when we're looking at a table like this, we're needing to look above the table and then below the table to understand what's in the table. For instance, only by looking at below the table do we notice that these dashes mean that either there's no data or there are fewer than 50,000 cases. Okay, so When there are fewer than 50,000 cases, as is the case here, you only have 14,000 for legislators, 39,000 for advertising and promotions managers. Then you don't have median weekly earnings reported because it's not enough numbers for them to have statistical confidence. So that's why you're not going to be able to talk about the weekly median earnings of legislators and compare them, right, as an outcome between men and women. So notice you really here have a few variables, right? And you need to think about, well, what is the outcome that you want to explain within what kind of story that you're telling. So we have the number of workers overall, and then we have the number of workers that are men and the number of workers that are women. We have occupations, and we have median weekly earnings for men and women. That's at least 3 variables there. And actually, if you follow the link down at the bottom of this page, you'll see that I've truncated the table. It's quite long, just so you can get an idea of what's being presented in this table of government statistics. Because we know that there's a number of total workers that equals the number for men and the number for women, you can check that through math here using a few rows. You can think about the percentage of each occupation that is men and the percentage that is women, which is an indication of what? An idea, sex segregation, right? Which occupations are predominantly men, predominantly women, and by what margin, right? So, for instance, management, professional, and related occupations overall, we have 23,685 men compared to 25,123 women. That's roughly equal, as opposed to legislators, where there are 2.5 times as many men as there are women, which is a big difference. And within management, professional, and related occupations, chief executives, where it's twice again and then a bit more many men than there are women. Whereas for financial managers, more women than there are men. It's a variable. And it's something that you can think about. You could begin to think about contingent means, which means averages, or in this case, medians, contingent medians that differ according to some other variable. So if you compare the median weekly earnings of men versus women, which are the ones in which men are very strongly likely to outpace women? In just about every case here, men earn more than women. But where is that difference very small and where is that difference large? Does it have to do with the share of the occupation that is men versus women? You could find out. You could also identify the occupations that are most sex segregated, or you could just list the occupations that have the highest pay gap between men and women in their weekly earnings. All kinds of questions that you could answer with this one table. So your topic of interest, your interest as a reader and a reviewer of this work, whether it is your own research publication or someone else's research publication that you're trying to explain to someone else, is going to drive the kind of questions that you try to answer with this data. Many questions to answer. So, in an academic presentation, just as in a research paper, you're going to find that you have an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. Now, the body, depending on whether you're simply reporting on statistics or you're reporting on statistics within the context of an academic research paper, that's going to compose your body. And you should follow the elements of a statistical table or a paper in describing what is in the body of your presentation. Your introduction and your conclusion should be the moments in which you focus in for everyone else in the audience with a clear message of what it is that you intend to be talking about and how they should be looking at that information in regard to what questions. As Mark Hill said in a famous short paper of tips on presentation, you should tell them what you're going to tell them. That's the introduction. Then tell them, that's the body. And then tell them what you told them in a summary or a conclusion. It doesn't hurt to repeat yourself in that way because it helps to get the message across. The likelihood that content will be absorbed the first time that you present it is maybe better than chance. And a majority of time that might happen. But if you want to get everyone in the audience to be moving along with you, say it more than once. Say it a slightly different way. In an introduction, stated in the form of a question. In the body, stated in the form of an answer. And in a conclusion, what can you talk about? You can talk about limitations. You can talk about implications for understanding and an implication for resolving whatever it is, this blank, this issue that you have. You can also describe limitations. That's an excellent place for you to talk about limitations, is in the conclusion. To help your audience restrain themselves in their enthusiasm from over-interpreting the conclusions that you make. For instance, if your research that you're describing is only regarding the state of New Jersey, that might not be representative for the entire United States population, and it might be helpful for you to say so. If this is work that is based on a convenience sample rather than a simple random sample, and is therefore less likely to be representative of the entire population you're studying, this is where you need to say it. And this is where you need to indicate that the research you're presenting is not perfect, because no research is absolutely perfect. Limitations are always there. Declare them in your conclusion. And this summary, where you describe what it is that you said, the limitations that you talk about, and then the implications for understanding or resolving or fixing, if it's regarding a social problem, your topic or your problem of interest. All that should be serving the goal of answering the so what challenge. Imagine that there is someone in your audience and they're sitting there listening to what you're saying with folded arms and maybe a bit of a scowl on their face. And as you are preparing your presentation, imagine what that person is going to ask you, right? Imagine their criticisms. And the first criticism is, so why should I care? So what? So what does this have to do with the price of tea in China? What does this have to do with my life? You can imagine them saying. And maybe it doesn't have anything to do with their life. But if it doesn't, then you could imagine them saying, so what does this have to do with anyone's life? Why should anyone care? And you should have an answer. There is some reason that a person should remember what you have to say. What is that? And if you don't have that element, it's time to dive back in to the substance of that work and to find that reason. Because all research should have some form of relevance, either to directly solving a problem or to being able to do better research so that somewhere down the line we can have at least a better understanding of how the world works. So you may be asked to do a presentation in which you have a limited amount of time. In fact, most individuals, when they're given a presentation space, are given time limitations. And one of the sad truths is that people have a lot of trouble staying within those time periods. There are some folks, this is a minority, who have trouble filling up the space. And there are a lot of folks, this is the majority, who have trouble staying within the time boundaries. So if you find yourself practicing, which you should, and staying within the time boundaries, uh, or not staying within the time boundaries, going over the limit, then you need to head back to these questions of the elements of a statistical report, the elements of a paper, and deciding what is really important for you to describe. Not for you to describe everything in the paper, because you can't. The papers that are written are 20 to 30 pages long. It would take you an hour to read them aloud. You have to leave some things out. So start slashing through and get to the core of what it is that you intend to say, what you think matters, what is the answer to the question, so what, right? So why should we care? What is it that people should care about, and limit it to that? If you find yourself, on the other hand, in a 15-minute presentation, stopping after 5 minutes, then you have the problem of not enough content. So when that happens, there are a few things that you can do. The first is to make sure that you've gone through all your material and described each element of a research project well. Did you describe very quickly the data and the methods? Did you describe the findings? Did you describe the theories and the hypotheses? Fill those in. If after having done that, you still aren't up to 15 minutes in a 15-minute presentation, chances are you haven't said enough, haven't added enough detail in. And so this is when you need to fall back on a couple of checks. The first is to go through the journalism W's, as they're called. The who, what, when, where, why, and how. Is one of those missing? Did you not describe the time period? That's simple. Did you not describe where the research is taking place? That's simple. Put it in. The what, the why, and the how are really important. What being, what is the case that is being studied? That may seem obvious to you, but if you don't make it obvious to everybody else, then you've missed something. So is the case an individual person in the case of social science? Is the case as large as a nation, or something in between? Institutions, communities, groups, all of these can be the case. Relationships can be the case. The relationship between two people, called a dyad. Know what your case is and make that clear. The why and the how. Why is saying what is leading to differences in outcomes. So the outcome variable is your dependent variable. The factors that lead to that or are at least associated with it are the independent variables. So know what each of the independent variables measured are. Each one is, rather. And think about whether you have described the relationship between each independent variable and the dependent variable. When you do that, then you will get to a model of how. How does this whole system of variables work? That will be related to the material in the literature review, which creates theories about stories about how independent variables affect dependent variables. It will also be either confirmed or not confirmed in research results. So if you've done all the W's of journalism, think then about examples and clarifications. You may have said something very important and somewhat difficult conceptually or intellectually, and you may not have communicated it in enough depth that your audience will understand it. If you have had a difficult point in developing your presentation, in understanding a conceptual point, that's an indication that your audience may have the same difficulty with that idea. So create some examples of how it might work. If there are historical examples of such a case, bring a little history in. If not, then you can create some hypothetical situations that would describe either the theory that you're trying to explain, the prediction, the hypothesis that you're trying to explain, or the pattern in results. And then go through some clarifications. If there are some difficult terms that are not commonly understood, make sure that you clearly turn around and explain what you mean. Um, so if there's a definition, don't just read the definition from the research paper, especially if it's difficult. Turn and say, in other words, what this means is, and you will make sure that your audience follows along with you. And by being clear, offering examples, and filling in all these W's, right, you will find that you all of a sudden have quite a bit to say, and a 15-minute time frame is not difficult to fill. So when we're thinking about organization, how you go about saying all this, the main thing to do if you want to bring your audience with you is to avoid creating a laundry list of items. Just simply fact, 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 or tip, 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 in the case of a presentation about how to present, right? So if you look at this sheet of paper, it consists of my original notes on this subject, which is literally a laundry list of suggestions, things that have worked for me in making presentations. But I quickly figured out that that's, about 20 of them. And what I did then was I thought, okay, how can I organize this into a story? A story that has some organization and that people can follow. And in order to do that, I use the technique called chunking. Chunking refers to the psychological concept of chunks. This is a finding that most people can remember a series of numbers or a series of facts that are in, or a series of names that are in sets of 3 to 5, 7 at most, right? So you can think about this in terms of phone numbers. My phone number in my office is 20762131190. That is 10 numbers, and that is by itself too many numbers for someone to remember. However, if you use the trick of dividing that 10-digit number up into 3 segments, right? 3 segments, that's a set of 3 things, and each one having 3 to 4 numbers, right? The area code is 3, and then there's the more local number, which is an additional 3, and then there's my individual number for my individual phone within the locality, which is 3. All of a sudden, that's 3 sets of 3 to 4, right? And we can remember 3 numbers, we can remember the next 3 numbers, we can remember the next 4 numbers, and we can remember those 3 sets. Make sure that you chunk. If you look through the presentation that I have, you'll notice that it has an overall claim regarding 3 things. Okay, content, organization, and style. So we covered content, we've moved on to organization, and then we're thinking about style. You'll also notice that I have a graphic indicator at the top that reminds people, where are we in this story of 3 things, just 3 things. There's a lot of complexity in what I'm saying, but it's organized under those 3 banners. Okay. And then within any one story, then I'm saying, okay, here we are in the first of 3 elements, content. Notice I have 3 elements beneath it, right? Every page, this one's a little complicated, it's 5, it's really pushing it, right? 5 elements of an academic paper. Okay, 3 elements of a statistical report. This is a table that clearly has to be summarized and needs to be chunked a little bit, right? So you can't simply talk about every number. It hasn't been chunked. It hasn't been broken down into something that people can understand. We can't look at all these numbers all at once, develop a story that is chunked, in which you're comparing sets of 3 to 5 things. right? How can you do that? How can you break this down in a way that is comprehensible? That's a challenge, okay? So 3 elements here, 4 elements here, 3 here. The whole idea is that people can take sets of 3 to 5, a chunk of 3 to 5 at once, and process it, okay? So in so doing, I'm telling what I hope is a clear story, that I want to say presentation is about content, it's about organization, and it's about style. And then there's elements of the stories that are little plot points. So every once in a while, you've noticed that I've paused for a second or two. And that has been because sometimes the material is a little bit more complicated. And it requires a moment for some people to catch up or for an idea to sink in. When you've been given 15 minutes and you have a lot of information to present, you have a difficult choice sometimes. Do you want to speak very quickly and get it all in, or do you want to go more slowly and decide to kick some things out? And in my experience, the presentations that go a little bit slowly at times, in terms of speaking speed and in terms of the presence of pauses, are the ones that are more likely to actually be understood. And those that rush through and simply shove word after word after word after word in very quickly are actually not going to be remembered by the people that are watching those presentations. In terms of a good guideline for pace, and the number of words that you want to present, okay, think about this. Think about the number of slides you have and the number of minutes you have. You know you're rushing if you have more slides than you have minutes. And you know you're doing well if you are able to make it within your time frame and you're giving each slide at least 1 minute. Because if you think about it, a slide is going to take a few seconds for your audience to look at and to do their own chunking to say, okay, here's the subject, here's the text. Oh, and now I want to listen to the speaker, right? That takes itself, just getting used to a slide, a good 10 or 15 seconds. That only gives you a few seconds more to talk about something within the space of a minute. If you try to do a slide every 30 seconds, people won't be able to follow. So a maximum of 1 slide per minute and possibly even fewer slides than that. And then also think about some way to spice up your presentation. You will be speaking words. People will be reading words. Occasionally, you will have tables of numbers like this. Okay, and then people also sometimes understand the world in terms of pictures. There are different kinds of people in the world. There are people in the world who hear things best through words and understand that way. There are people who understand things best in terms of looking directly at numbers, and there are people who learn through pictures. And you're going to want to appeal to both. So let me show you a table here in which you have 2 variables. Actually, you kind of have 3. You have 2 groups, you have 3 classes. So which group are you in? Which class are you in? And then which score does each combination of group and class obtain? Right? So that's a table in the upper left that leads to 6 different numbers. Do you understand that table more intuitively, or do you understand, can you see what the pattern is in the chart below? It presents the same information. No information is left out, perhaps a bit of precision regarding the specific numerical score. There's an axis, but it's not that exact. But the whole point is about group or class differences. And what do you see? If you're like me, you see a consistent difference between group A and group B, whatever those might be, regardless of what class you're in. and not much difference between classes overall, or at least not an immediately perceptible one. You might be a person that understands tables better, likes being able to look at the numbers and compare them. You might be a person who enjoys pictures more, but recognize that people in your audience are likely to be comprised of both groups, numbers and pictures. And everybody will appreciate a few moments for you to share words regarding them, because no picture speaks for itself, no table speaks for itself. You should speak for them. They have no voice. Do pictures and numbers and words. Finally, think about style, how they see it. Well, the first rule is that they have to see it. I can't tell you how many uh, long employed academics I've seen who have tried to cram information in slides where they're printing blue on blue or gray on black, and it's just not legible. Have high contrast, a light type on a dark background or a dark type on a light background. It's a little more boring, but it's legible. And people won't remember your color choice as much, hopefully, as they remember being able to actually read the slides that you present. Make sure they're high contrast colors. Second thing is that you have every slide contain at least 24-point type. If the type is too small, then there are two problems. The first is that people won't be able to read them. There are a number of people who don't have perfect prescriptions to their glasses, and therefore you're going to see things fuzzy as it is, and making the signs a little bigger in the world is helpful. In addition, if you have to make your type so small for everything to fit in, then chances are you haven't been chunking the information correctly. That is, dividing it up into sets of 3 to 5 conceptual divisions, right? 3 to 5 pieces of information at any one time. And instead, you're probably doing a laundry list, which is an indication that you need to simplify it and stretch out that information into more slides. The next thing you want to be able to do is provide a little bit of space, because space provides organization, right? If you have a little bit of empty space on a slide, it actually tends to draw attention to the part of the slide where information is. It's funny how that works, but it does. If your slide is filled with type or just filled with picture after picture after picture, people will find it confusing. It's a little less confusing if there's some empty spaces now and then. And then finally, remember, especially if you're going to be communicating over a video conference line or on the internet, as this presentation is doing, you're going to want to include your face, because there's all kinds of depth in how a person's face makes a communication, and sometimes their hands as well. It lends emphasis, it keeps attention, it presents some form of judgment sometimes regarding what is being said. It puts things in a complicated, complex, nuanced context that people will remember a little bit easier. And if you're a purist about information just being able to express itself, that's hypothetically lovely, but we human beings respond to each other's faces very well. So especially if you are new in making presentations, taking the time to have your face be part of the presentation is essential. And if you're going to be taking questions and answers, giving answers to those questions afterward, it's essential that you be present and people can see what you're saying. For those people who are hard of hearing, being able to read your lips is essential. And having an audio commentary, even on the internet nowadays, it will be available to those who cannot hear perfectly as closed captions that are accessible. So having a space for your face where you're not covering up the content is essential as well. You'll notice that I've kept one corner of the presentation clear consistently so that I can have my face be present and yet at the same time not uh, be obscuring the content underneath that I wish to communicate. If you can attend to these elements of content, organization, and style in your presentation, and you can go through a few iterations of your presentation, try out your presentation, see how it works, revise it, go back, and when you've got the right form, practice it a few times with a timer to see how you do in terms of your time limits. You will tend to do fine. The more new you are to a field or to doing academic presentation, the more you'll need to practice. But even those people who say, I never practice a presentation, they're either in a camp of presenting presentations that people don't enjoy seeing, or they might be deceiving you. They might actually be secretly practicing quite a bit. Follow these tips, and you'll at least have a passable presentation. Insert your creativity where it's appropriate, and you may have a presentation that would knock people's socks off. And that's superlative, but take care of these basics, and the superlatives can come next. Best of luck in your own presentation. This has been James Cook with the University of Maine at Augusta.